Hi, it's been around 4 months now since my last video about my indie game Isocore, and a lot has happened since then. As you may have seen in the title, my priority this time has been filling the open world with life. But unlike my other videos, where I dive into one major topic that covers a large new foundational mechanic, in this video I'm going to focus mostly on all of the new additions and features that I've been adding over the last 4 months. Since after the last video, I thought about what I wanted to work on next, and I decided that I wanted to start moving the game towards a state where it actually contains enough content to play and explore so that the gameplay actually feels like it has a purpose. After some time thinking, and also going back to look at some notes that I have been accumulating over the last year, I came up with a list of stuff and features that I really wanted to implement. But the list grew so large that I had to split it into 2 updates, or this video would have taken another 4 months to come out. But on the first half of the list, most points revolve around one particular problem. When playing the game, running around and exploring, the only thing alive is you. Nothing moves, nothing makes a sound, everything is static. Therefore, after some time, you start feeling alone, which is not a bad thing per se, but it's just not the gameplay feel I'm going for with this project. So I decided to focus on bringing a bit more life into the world and giving the player a sense of presence beyond just themselves. But before we can start adding life, I had to make sure that there's the correct habitat for each form. Which brings me to another point that I wanted to change anyway, which is the water. The water until now has been looking okay-ish. It's not super bad, but it is indeed boring, and I think there is a huge amount of potential in making the world more diverse and more beautiful with some changes to it. So I went ahead and made the water transparent and changed the terrain generation so that it also generates below sea level. Still, the water was missing some depth since every layer had the same brightness, which is not how water behaves. Of course, when water gets deeper, it gets darker since less light is able to get through. But like always, since my game is a 2D game and doesn't know realistic lighting, I had to use a little workaround. I ended up implementing a simple function that is called each time a block is loaded, which checks if a block is below sea level, and if it is, it incrementally moves its base color towards a preset value based on its depth. This made a really nice depth effect that showed where water got deeper. In addition, I added some blocks and plants to create some basic underwater vegetation, which I also applied the depth color function to. After that, I went ahead and pixeled some cattails and lily pads and made them spawn near the shore. One last thing that I really wanted to add before moving on was swimming. I coded the mechanic and sat down to pixel a little player swimming animation, which I think turned out really well, considering that my animation skills are really poor. Now, with the improved water, I could start implementing the life. The first thing I did was delete the mob script. It was garbage, and completely rewrite the base mob class with a couple of changes. I ended up writing a very large base class that contained all the basic shared behavior of mobs, like movement, attacking, basic AI logic, animation handling, and event handling, which I could then derive more specific classes for each creature. During the coding of the base class, I just used the old slime for testing until I felt like it was good enough. Now, the only thing missing was a proper spawner that spawns and tracks all mobs correctly to keep the world from overpopulating or dying out. To ensure this, the mob spawner keeps track of 2 values for each chunk: friendly mob population and hostile mob population. The mob handler loops with a rate of 1 chunk per frame through every currently loaded chunk and makes sure none of those values exceed the allowed limit, and if they don't, it performs a spawn attempt. This way, the world population is kept at a stable rate. Since I really like the new water and the shore vegetation, I wanted to add some frogs near the water sources. And after implementing the frog script and adding some specific frog behavior, like making them croak now and then, I was basically already done. But while the frog was more of a cosmetic feature, I also wanted some animals with a use case. For example, to make a book in the game, you need leather, which could only be found in chests near ruins. But that was just a temporary workaround. To replace the chest as leather source, the next mob that I added was a deer. Opposite to the frog, deer can only be found close to or inside forests, and spawn leather when killed. But I decided to leave the option of getting leather from chests, just in case some players don't want to hurt them. However, since deer are pretty rare to spot, I thought that I should add another mob for the same biome and region. So in addition to the deer, I also added a fox. Both of these creatures are not shy, but run from the player when hurt. And I do plan on making them avoid the player in the future unless you're able to sneak up on them. All of these 3 creatures spawn in the forest, but of course I also wanted mobs in the other biomes. Which is why for the desert I added an armadillo. It only spawns in the desert and has a very large health bar due to its protective armor, pieces of which, when obtained, can be used in potion brewing. Initially, this was actually all the mobs I planned to implement for this update, but I couldn't help myself and had to add one more. It is actually the only mob that can spawn in every biome right now, which is fish. Currently, they don't do much except swimming around, but they might be a good option to add fishing mechanics later on. You might have noticed that until now, all the mobs that I added, with the exception of the slime that already existed, are friendly. And in one of the last videos, I said that I didn't want to focus the game too much on fighting, which is a topic I have changed my mind on. I don't want to make it a fighting game, but I do realize that a larger variety of hostile and more challenging mobs might be a great addition for those who enjoy that aspect. At the end of the day, it is still a survival game. That, however, is a topic for the second content update. At this point, I would like to point out that while I still create a lot of the art myself, every mob in this update, except for the fish, was pixeled by Mochicano. She's been contributing art alongside my own art, which gives me much more time to focus on development. So a huge thanks to her, and if you'd like to check her out, I've linked her in the description. With the mobs now added, the world already felt a lot more alive. However, there was still one more thing missing. Since I had already added the beehive, it felt like I had to add bees. It just felt weird seeing the beehive magically fill with honeycombs without ever spawning a single bee. So I created a really simple bee animation and implemented a small insect class that when spawned flies around randomly for a while before despawning again. After that, I only had to periodically spawn them around the beehive. After already having created the insect class, I took the opportunity and added some butterflies as well, which randomly spawn in the forest from time to time. And for the nighttime, I added some fireflies. In the end, I decided to let the bees occasionally spawn randomly in the forest too, just to add a bit more variety alongside the butterflies. I have to say that I'm super thankful for being able to make this project. But before being able to start such a project, there is of course the need for some foundational knowledge, like in math or in computer science. And while usually learning the basics can be overwhelming at the start, that does not have to be the case. And if you would like to learn the skills to start your own projects, I would highly recommend Brilliant. Brilliant is a great way to start building your own skills in math and programming for your own projects. At the same time, they also offer a lot more courses in the fields of science, logical reasoning, data analysis, and more. The great thing about Brilliant is that their courses are fully interactive and that you learn by solving problems and not just watching videos or reading a book, which really makes it feel more like a game rather than a boring lecture. Every course is packed into individual lessons, which are crafted by world-class teachers from MIT, Harvard, and Stanford. Brilliant is the perfect tool to start growing your knowledge, even if you only have 10 to 20 minutes a day. If you want to learn to code, for example, I really recommend the course Thinking and Code, which I think is actually one of the most important skills before starting to learn a programming language. So if you want to start your journey on Brilliant, you can actually start learning 30 days for free by going to brilliant.org/JohnBricks via scanning the QR code or using the link in my description. And on top of that, Brilliant gives all my viewers 20% off their annual premium subscription, which gives you daily unlimited access to everything on Brilliant. I had already implemented food in the form of bread, which restores your HP when eaten, but I had a different use case that I wanted to use it for. At the same time, I wanted to add a system that could create some form of challenge for the player that isn't just about taking damage. So I thought an energy system would be a good solution. Not does it only create a softer and more forgiving difficulty level, but it also makes the use and the advantage of tools much more visible and noticeable. The player's energy is displayed via this green bar, and each time the player performs an energy-consuming action like jumping, mining, digging, or swimming, the energy slowly decreases. When the player runs out of energy, there isn't a hard punishment, but it's definitely something you want to avoid. Once depleted, the player's hit rate is reduced by half, as well as their movement speed. The only real punishment happens when swimming without energy, which causes you to drown. To avoid that, you can use food to replenish your energy. Now that food had a proper purpose, I thought that it was time to add a bit more variety than just bread. I ended up adding two types of food, crops and wild food. Wild food includes things like berries, which grow around the forest and serve primarily as an early game food source to restore energy when you're just getting started. They're easy to find, but they don't restore much energy, creating the need for better food later on. But wild food isn't only for the early game. Another type of wild food that I added is meat. You can obtain meat from deer and foxes, and when cooked, it currently provides the highest energy replenishment rate of any food. For crops, I added some basics that I thought would fit, like potatoes and carrots. And while adding them, I also added sugar beets and pumpkins, although they can't be used as food for the moment. Before continuing, as always, if you enjoyed the video and like the project, consider wishlisting Isocore on Steam. And if you really wish to support the project and want to be able to play the current version already, you can become a playtester through my Patreon. The links to both are in the description. There was one mechanic that I had in mind for a long time already. For some reason, I really like the idea of adding temperature to different biomes, to act like a soft border between them and make access a bit harder. For that, I created this little temperature meter which is next to your energy bar, which always shows your current temperature. When you enter the desert, it slowly starts rising, and in the snow biome, it starts falling. If your temperature goes over or below a certain threshold, you will first only start to lose energy faster, giving you a chance to leave the area. But if you decide to stay and your temperature becomes too cold or too hot, you will start taking damage slowly. However, biomes aren't the only thing that can influence your temperature. Your surroundings do as well. For example, when jumping into water, your temperature drops, allowing you to be in the desert without taking damage. The same applies to rain. Now, having this temperature system of course means that the player also needs a way to do something against the heat or cold. The game already had potions which give you an instant effect, like healing you or restoring your ability to fast travel. So building on top of that, I added elixirs. The difference between elixirs and potions is that elixirs have a timer-based effect that runs out after a while. I ended up adding a small collection of elixirs for the start with different kinds of effects. When consuming an elixir, the effect is displayed above your toolbar with a small timer telling you approximately how much time you have left. Many of you probably still remember the windmill from older gameplay footage. And while until now the door of the windmill was actually a bit misleading since there was no way to access the inside of the building, adding accessible indoor spaces to buildings has been a really frequent request in the community. I generally had two ideas. On one hand, I could have made the building accessible by giving them an accurately sized indoor space and fading out the building facade when going through a door. However, that would only allow for pretty small indoor spaces since the buildings don't allow for more. The other option was to load a separate scene when going into a building, allowing me to load a larger interior than the actual building size like in most old school RPGs. And since I couldn't decide which one I preferred, I went over to the Isocore Discord server and made a poll for the community to vote on. And after 1 week, the old school separate indoor scene won with 57%, which was close, but now I knew what to do. To implement the separate indoor scene while still being able to use the same saving system, I ended up implementing a world space ID system. It basically means that every block and building in the save file is now accessed via its own world position in combination with a world space ID, to determine if it's positioned inside the normal overworld or maybe inside a specific house. This way I can actually load the indoor space in the same terrain system that I use for the normal overworld without having collisions or problems in the save files later on. It might also be the foundation I need to implement something in the next update that includes different world spaces, but more on that in the next video. Now it's possible to place a building and access its interior, as well as place stuff and craft the same way you can do it in the overworld. But before releasing this update, I really wanted to add at least one more building in addition to the windmill, so I quickly pixeled a small, simple player house. And last but not least, some smaller changes that I made, mostly based on requests from the community. Items can now be transferred directly without dragging them between chests and your inventory via shift-click. I made objects and blocks that hide the player transparent via a fading effect instead of instantly. I changed the way the information UI shows up, including this little button that lets you know when an item can be used in a certain way. And I added a large number of new items. In general, I'm very happy with the first of 2 content updates, and even though there's still a lot missing, I feel like it's slowly becoming a truly playable game. Between this video and the next one, there will be additional content updates expanding on the systems I presented here. If you'd like to stay up to date, feel free to join the Isocore Discord server. That's also where I'll be hosting a Q&A soon. The link is in the description. As always, I really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, consider subscribing, leaving a like, and maybe even wishlisting Isocore on Steam. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.